building a better Bay Area for a safe and secure future. This is ABC 7 News.
Hi there, I'm Kristen Z. Welcome to our daily program called Getting Answers. We're asking experts your question every day at 3 to get answers for you in real time. Today, we have State Superintendent of Public Education, Tony Thurmond, with us. But first, we want to update you on Santa Clara County because they are entering a new phase in their COVID-19 response with a focus on making this really the long-term plan. Pending state approval, the stay-at-home order will lift July 13th, but you are still being urged to stay at home whenever possible. And instead of listing sectors, they say if you cannot comply with their core business requirements like capacity limits and mask requirements, then you cannot open, meaning indoor dining, for example, and swimming won't be allowed, they said, for the foreseeable future. But businesses like hair and nail salons will be given guidance to reopen with masks, of course. Businesses are legally required to report a positive case from an employee within 4 hours of finding out. The order strongly discourages gatherings, but allows outdoor gatherings up to 60 people and indoor gatherings up to 20 people, but they must comply with the health officer's forthcoming mandatory directive on gatherings. So that is the latest there from Santa Clara County. So with that in mind, a tightening of things, let's move now to State Superintendent of Education, Tony Thurmond. Always good to see you. Thank you for making the time for us again. Tony, I want to ask you, what is your reaction to the COVID surge in California this past month? Does it affect our kids' chances for returning to their campuses this fall?
Well, first, I would just say we have to pay attention to this surge. And I think it tells us that we've got to stick with the plan. Hand washing, wearing face coverings at all times, keeping our distance from others. And in the case of when schools open, maintaining physical distance. And so obviously we have some time before schools open, which is late August, early September. And so we'll check to see what the safety conditions are. We monitor them on a daily basis and talk to health experts. But the signs that we're seeing are concerning. And we need to continue to monitor that, put safety first, and keep an eye on this as we work towards the August and September timeline.
I'm sure, as you saw, Governor Gavin Newsom today introduced a bunch of PSAs that are going to run designed to raise public awareness. Mask wearing is a big component. Are you thinking of doing something similar for schools so that school kids can digest that and really get acculturated with the idea of wearing masks and socially distancing when they do go back?
We know that in some other states, many districts have spent time really trying to educate families on how young children can get used to wearing a mask. And, I've seen it. I'm sure you've seen it. We've all seen it. Young people do get it when we explain that this is just part of our safety routine. And so while it's different, we do have to take the time to explain it. And we know our child care centers, many of them stayed open when our schools closed initially and moved into distance learning. Many of our child care centers stayed open to provide care for the children of essential workers. It is amazing that even some very young children got accustomed to wearing the mask. But the reality is sometimes they take it off and sometimes they play with it. The more we help them prepare, the better off we're all going to be in terms of our safety.
So you're going to be doing that, taking steps to produce materials that'll help them prepare and really learn that.
We're going to work with districts as much as we can. We don't have the ability to do public service announcements per se, but we certainly would like to continue to promote that. And as you know, we put in our guidance a recommendation that every staff member and every student should be wearing a face covering. And I should say that masks are on their way to each of our 10,000 schools. Many have already received it. The face coverings, the hand sanitizer, the thermometers, all these things are literally on their way to our 10,000 schools.
All right, that's great because that's much needed. I wonder, though, what do you make of the American Academy of Pediatrics just yesterday saying that elementary school-age children do not need to wear masks? But here in the Bay Area, teachers that I've talked to seem really concerned about that, especially because we know 1/3 of California teachers are over the age of 50. How do you make the teachers feel reassured that they're going to be minimizing their exposure when they do return to the classrooms?
I just want to say right at the top, I have deep respect for our pediatricians and their association. They do incredible work around youth development helping our students deal with ACEs and risk factors that they experience. And to be honest with you, Chris, and I'd like to meet with the pediatricians and along with some of the other folks that we work with a lot of people who are epidemiologists and others. And so, I get what they're saying. The pediatricians have said that some children may even have health conditions that would suggest that they shouldn't wear a mask. We've really taken the approach that all students should wear a mask until we have more information about this. And we're not wanting to gamble on the safety of our young people. There just isn't a whole lot of science. Mm-hmm. And right now, everything that we've seen from epidemiologists and disease infection doctors, all of those things suggest that everyone wears a mask. Sometimes we say it this way: if we ask young people to wear a mask when they go out in public, why wouldn't we ask them to wear a mask in school as well? Mm-hmm. Based on what we know. And so, like I said, deep respect for the pediatricians. We want to meet with them. We want to have these conversations with our epidemiologists present and others to try and sort this all out. For now, we're sticking with our recommendation that everyone, students and staff in our schools, should be wearing a mask.
All right, Tony, I'm just going to run through a whole bunch of questions because every time I mention, hey, Tony Thurmond is coming back on our show, I get questions from school administrators, teachers, parents, students, and the like. So here's one from a school district official. So your plan contains temperature checks, but what about on-campus routine testing for COVID of both students and staff?
Well, as I mentioned before, we've worked very closely with the California Department of Public Health. They are trying to figure out the right guidelines for the issues around testing as it relates to schools. Now, what they've done is they've moved California to a place where we have 60,000 tests a day in the community. I'm not sure that they've envisioned that to happen directly at schools, but they're having those conversations. So we're listening to the Department of Public Health and our county health officers on the issues of testing. But the testing that's happening in our community and the contract tracing that's happening is really helping us to understand where we need to do more on safety, where we might need to scale back a little bit. And so while the testing hasn't really been a factor in schools per se, the conversation between school leaders and statewide health officials is taking place about having robust testing to keep us all safe.
All right. Nina, who is a mother, on Twitter asked, I am also concerned regarding eating inside the classroom with no proper ventilation. How many children will be allowed to eat lunch at a time? Would it be all 35 at once, or would lunch times be staggered? What's your recommendation?
It's a great question. When we wrote our guidance, we considered a bunch of scenarios. Like some schools might even say, listen, we're going to have a morning session where students come and then go home at lunch with a brown bag lunch, and some students come after lunch. Most school districts are saying that they're going to really work to keep class sizes small and then have students eat lunch at their desk with 6 feet of spacing in between each desk. And so, Mom, check with your local school district to see what they've written. By now, most of our schools have written their specific guidance plans. You certainly can contact our office if you need help getting connected to your school district at the California Department of Education. We're happy to do that. Right now, all we're saying is 6 feet. And yes, we do not envision any scenario where it's safe to have students eating in a large cafeteria. We know that, large groups in a big room spells danger. And so really what we envision is, and we've seen this in the childcare centers that are open, students eating at their desks with space 6 feet apart, even eating outside. We've got great weather right now. That allows us to expand the footprint of our campuses. Even those types of interventions are really helpful for keeping us safe. Stay tuned. There'll be more to come on that subject.
All right, real quickly before we take a break, Jay on Facebook wants to know, will the State Department of Education and the legislature allow students, parents, teachers, and staff to choose the mode of return?
And so with 1,000 school districts, Jay, each of those school districts is surveying parents to hear what their interests are. A number of parents have said that they want to have an in-person instruction option because they need it, because they've got to get back to work. Others have said that they prefer to have distance learning. It is the viewpoint of the California Department of Education that schools should accommodate as much distance learning as parents ask for. Now, the legislature has taken this issue up and is fine-tuning some guidelines on how that will work. Again, the recommendation that we'll be making at the California Department of Education is to honor the amount of distance learning that it can based on what parents ask for. We do know that there's going to need to be some balance of distance learning and some in-class instruction. And that's a decision made by each of our school districts with support and guidance from the state.
All right, Tony, we're going to take a short break on the air, but continue this conversation over on our live streams and be back here in a couple minutes.
Sure.
All right. Always great to have State School Superintendent Tony Thurmond with us. Tony, also on Facebook, I'm seeing questions about special needs children. A parent mentioning it is harder for them to wear masks. So can you address that? And also somebody else asked about the possibility of wearing face shields instead of masks.
Yes, thank you for the question. The guidance that the Department of Education has put out actually envisions that for some children, there is an exception to wearing a face covering. Students who have special needs or some, students with disabilities, that there are some young people who just won't be able to tolerate wearing a mask. And so in those cases, our guidance suggests making an exception, but making sure that there's 6 feet of distance between that student and anyone else for the safety of everyone. In terms of face shields, thanks to the help of the governor's office, face shields are on the way to all of our schools. There's enough for all of our teachers plus some. And we know this is important because many of our teachers who teach language, students need to be able to see their facial expression. I'm coming to you today from one of our great schools that serves deaf students in the state. And when we use, American Sign Language, it's important that while we're signing, students need to also be able to see the facial expressions of their peers and their teachers.
Sure. Right.
There will be some face coverings, some shields for some students, and definitely for all of our teachers.
All right, I think we have about 30 seconds, so I don't know if you can complete this question, but we'll try. Paula wants to know, 12 students, 6 feet apart. There's some 30 students typically in every classroom. How is that going to work?
I can tell you how it's working in some districts. What they've done is they've partnered with the local YMCA or a community center to have a little bit of space to make the footprint of the campus bigger. They're using their outdoor space. We know it's hard. We're working with our districts right now to measure out their space, to figure out how to keep 6 feet of distance apart of all of our students.
All right, Tony, way to follow those time cues. Our director loves you. Thanks so much. We're coming back on TV.
3, 2.
And we are back with State Superintendent of Public Education, Tony Thurmond. Great to have him again. Tony, we've talked about this before, but just remind our viewers, do you set policy or do you actually have the power to tell the state's 1,000 school districts exactly what to do?
The way the California Department of Education works, and my job as an elected state superintendent, is really to give guidance to school districts. Really, we created a how-to guide for them on how to reopen schools. But state law says that each of our 1,000 school districts makes their own decisions about how and when they'll open. What I try to do in my job is use my position to advocate with the governor and the legislature for the funding that our schools need to reopen, for the personal protective equipment, and for the guidelines that will give school districts the flexibility to offer the right type of programs that will keep our students and their educators safe.
Okay. Hey, so let's talk about the local level. So Marin County has passed a reopening plan that calls for in-person instruction 5 days a week, unless something changes. San Mateo's High School District, though, is actually starting with 100% distance learning. So in every district, there seem to be heated battles. What do you think is the ideal instruction structure to start the school year when you balance the safety, the mental health, the learning, and the social needs of the kids? Is it all distance learning? Is it all in person? Is it a hybrid? What do you think?
I think it tends to be more of a hybrid. I don't think there's a one size that fits all. There are different needs in every community. In some communities, we've seen families asking for 100% distance learning. In others, it's more like 60 or 70% say, I need in-class instruction. I need to get back to work. And they also recognize that students need peer-to-peer contact. That's something that we agree with. We just want to make sure that it can be done safely. We always say this, here are the keys that are important. I call them the 3 pillars. First and foremost, safety. We won't open any schools unless it's safe to do. We follow the science about what we know about how to keep students and staff safe. Second, we must address the social emotional needs of our students. During distance learning, depression was high, and so I created a counseling coalition to help find students who either didn't check in at school or who weren't engaged, who need additional support. So we have a way to support them. And then finally, if we have distance learning, We have to make sure that there's live instruction where teachers are seeing their students. Students miss that contact time. They learn more when they have live instruction, even through distance learning. So we've worked with the legislature and others to create some benchmarks for how distance learning needs to go. All of these things can work. Ultimately, it's up to what the local community needs, but we try to give some guidelines to ensure that it's broad and it meets the needs of everyone involved.
All right, Tony, since you brought up lessons learned from this past spring, I'm almost a little afraid to ask, but I want to know if you have any data yet to indicate to you just how much learning loss happened over the spring semester.
You know, there are different reports. I mean, first of all, I'm very grateful that our students, our educators, and our parents, literally moved into distance learning overnight, everywhere in this country, and certainly here in California, with no blueprint on how to do that, but with one key thing in mind: keeping students safe and helping to flatten the curve. And it really did. We know that there were some bumps, and there are some people who studied, experience, and they have found, many have said that there are these learning gaps that have been exacerbated for many of our students. Here's what we know for sure. When school starts, whatever format it opens in, teachers will do what they've always done. They'll assess where a student enters and do they enter on grade level. And if they're not entering on grade level, teachers will make some interventions to help that student get on grade level. Now that will mean that some students may need to double down. If it's a dual language immersion class, students may need to have a double session of language immersion. We know that there will be things that we'll have to address. There might be more enrichment programs during after school, but great teachers are doing great things with our students. And so while we know that loss is an issue, we just have to make sure it's safe for them to get back, and we address their social emotional needs. And what we're providing in distance learning and going forward is based on standards that promote quality of learning.
I want to ask you, given the way the school year will start and given the uncertainty of how it will end, is there any talk of getting rid of standardized tests and also maybe changing graduation requirements, that type of thing?
You know, some of that's happened already. As you know, Kristen, this year we, early on when we moved into distance learning, myself, the governor, the State Board of Education, we basically lobbied the federal government to excuse state testing for the year. We didn't think that it would be safe to come back to school to take these tests. We didn't think that these conditions would support our students being successful on these tests. And so we moved away from that. The other thing is we work with higher ed in the state, our community college, mostly our CSUs and our UCs and our private colleges, all of them together, and our community colleges, to say that students can be admitted to college this year without taking the SAT. That was critically important because we can't have a bunch of students together. And so this has definitely raised some questions about how do we measure learning going forward? And we think we're going to see some changes in how learning is measured. Less focus on how much seat time you have, but more focus on your ability to apply what you've learned. So stay tuned. We think there's going to be a lot going on around how we measure learning, but we think we're going to see a lot less standardized testing and more focus on practical skills that students learn, critical thinking, things that we know help our students for the future.
All right, I'm seeing a lot more questions come in about a hybrid model. There are teachers who wonder how can they be expected to teach well if they are to one day be in class with, let's say, several different cohort groups being exposed, and then the next day taking their curriculum and lesson plan online and continuing to go back and forth. What do you say to that?
It's a valid concern, and we'll be taking that up with some of our associations that focus on what happens in schools. Our Association of Administrators, our California Teachers Association, we'll be having those conversations. Generally speaking, the state is still expecting school to, have the same number of days. And so that means students have to be in school at least 4 to 5 days a week. What's different is the number of minutes. That part the state is providing flexibility on. We agree that for there to be continuity in learning, there should be a consistent program. And of course, more important than anything, we have to give lots of training and professional development to our teachers and educators. We can't make a bunch of rules and then not provide support to our educators. This is all different and new. We've never had this level of online learning provided in California or in the nation. And so as we move to more of it, we've got to provide professional development and training that focuses on quality for our educators. And we will be pushing for that. And we'll be working with our districts to make sure our teachers are getting that training.
All right, we're going to continue our on-air conversation with Tony Thurmond in just a moment. But right now, let's take this conversation over on our live streams. Be right back.
In commercial break.
All right, Tony, I wonder if you've heard that some of the locals of the teachers union have threatened to strike if their districts don't approve the instructional plan that they want or they deem safe. Do you support that?
I've certainly heard these concerns raised over the course of the last several weeks. You know, what I've tried to do is our office has said we will help to facilitate between statewide, teacher unions and education unions and our statewide administrators associations. We don't want there to be any disruption going forward. And so what we've said is we've got almost 2 months before school starts. Let's have the tough conversations now to make sure we get everything worked out. What's the best schedule? How do we keep everybody safe? How do we arrange students and staff in ways that keep everybody safe and everyone learning? Because nothing's more important than safety and supporting our students and those who care for them. And so our office continues to be available to help work through some of these labor disputes.
All right.
And so we'll continue to do that. I think that's the best way to ensure there's no disruption in schools. And we got to listen to our employees and listen to our students. And I think we keep those conversations going. We can keep people safe and working together because we can do more together to help each and every one of our students.
Sounds like you got to play mediator's role a little bit here too. Hey, I want to ask you a Facebook question. Will students be penalized if their parents refuse to send them to school?
The answer is that we think that would be inappropriate for a student to be penalized if a parent has a concern about their child's attendance. We know that some students themselves may have underlying health conditions or someone in their family may have an underlying health condition. They should be able to provide that information to their school to get an accommodation for whatever it is that they need to be safe.
All right, we got to take it back on air, Tony. So I'm going to put you on hold right there. Thanks. And we are back with State Superintendent Tony Thurmond to finish our conversation about how California will reopen schools safely for kids. A mom on Twitter is asking, are schools required to follow the public health guidelines on face coverings, distance, or is this really optional and up to each individual district?
It is true that the county health officers have the ability to require and prescribe what we do everywhere in a county. Whether it's in a grocery store or restaurant or even school. All those places are different. We do have to follow the orders that come from our county health officers. And if they say shelter in place, we need to shelter in place. If they say everyone's wearing a mask, then we all need to wear a mask. And so our office recommends that all students and staff wear a face covering for their own safety. At the end of the day, the county health officers absolutely have the ability to enforce. And what they say is a requirement. And again, we should all be following what the county health officers are saying.
All right, Facebook question here. How do you keep the cohort groups of kids separate when they're using the bathroom?
It's a great question. I know the only schools that have been open so far are our child care centers. And I know that they've worked hard to keep students maintaining physical distance. And so the same will be true when school from, K through 12 opens again. We'll have to have plenty of adult supervision and support to help steward our students along, to keep them from making contact that could cause them to get hurt or anyone in their family to be hurt. So stay tuned for more updates about that. Each school staffs a little differently, but we know it's important that all of our staff, this is a place where, our teachers and classified staff play a very key role. And we want to make sure our schools are staffed up and have the ability to support students in being safe on campus, on a bus, wherever they might be.
All right, we're continuing to see more questions apparently from teachers, or at least how to keep teachers safe, whether you might reduce class sizes, mandate that they are smaller, or perhaps hand out PPEs to everybody. What are you doing about that to protect the teachers?
Again, through our partnership with the governor's office and the Office of Emergency Services, PPE is already on the way to all of our 10,000 schools. In many cases, it's already arrived. We're talking about more than 14 million face coverings, the additional face shields, hundreds of thousands of gallons of hand sanitizers, all on the way to our schools to help keep staff safe. And so, by default, saying that class sizes have to be focused with 6 feet of distance, by default helps to create smaller class sizes as our schools measure out how many students they feel they can serve in a classroom based on 6 feet of physical distance. And so that work is underway. School districts are trying to figure out right now how many students they can serve in their classes. We know it's going to be smaller class sizes for sure.
What is the advice you give with regard to the phased approach to bringing back students? Because many of the local school districts seem to be focusing on bringing the at-risk kids or kids with learning differences back to campus first. But does that lead to extra exposure for that group?
I know that some school districts in the state have already brought back students who have disabilities and who need additional support. They brought them back. Some of our child care centers have been open, and they serve young people from, infancy through second and third grade, and so we are learning from these centers that have been open. Remarkably, and we're proud of our child care centers, they have followed these guidelines. And they have said that they have not had any contracted cases. Literally, the child care centers are asking parents to take the temperature of their children before they come to school. If they see any symptoms that they shouldn't come to school. They take their temperatures when they get to the child care center, and everyone's wearing a face covering and maintaining 6 feet of distance. These early openings are showing us that this can be done, but we must follow these protocols. We must follow the science that we know to help keep everyone safe.
All right, Tony, the questions just keep coming whenever you're on, so we do invite you back another time. But given that we have about 45 seconds left, I want to hear what you think we can each do right now, adults, kids, businesses, across the different sectors of society right now to ensure that our kids could come back to school in 6 weeks, or at least maximize the chances of that happening.
There's so many things that we can do. And just remember, we as adults, we have to remember that children take their cues from us. And so hand washing and maintaining physical distancing, and probably the most important thing, wearing a face covering. It's so important. And I know it's inconveniencing and it's difficult, but this is just something that we can do for now. There's going to be a time when we won't need it, but for now we do. Everything that we've seen shows us that this will keep us safe. We've got a role model for our kids and reinforce for them and support them in knowing that a face covering will keep us safe. In the meantime, we focus on safety. We focus on the mental health of our students. We make sure that our students are able to speak to the many issues happening right now in the public.
Superintendent Thurmond, thank you again for your time. Appreciate it. We're going to take a short break and be right back.
Thank you.
All right, we have 2 more minutes if you have it. Do you have 2 more minutes, or will your staff pull out the hook and hook you out of here?
Always be you.
That's fabulous, thank you. A couple of questions. This one, Teresa seems to be a teacher's aide. She says, if we do distance learning 100%, how will classified staff keep their jobs like classroom aides?
It's going to be a question at each district, but in many cases, classified staff associations are talking to school districts about the possibility of other duties for many of our classified staff. I know that when it comes to students with disabilities, the one-to-one aides are so important to our students. And when our students don't have access to them in distance learning, it's very difficult. In some cases, one-to-one aides may be able to still support their students even through a computer device and by remote. And so, check in with your local union, check in with your local school district on what the assignments will be if you're a classified staff person, but your district is in distance learning to see what accommodations the district is making for you.
All right, here's a point from Kim. She says she doesn't trust that parents will really be honest about sending their sick kids to school, or at least keeping them home, because, people do that so they can go to work, unfortunately. So she thinks it's not a good idea to leave the temperature taking up to the parents at home before school. Is that something you can ask the schools to do on site?
We are asking schools to do it, and in order to make it happen, we've actually sent thermometers to schools so that schools have the ability to do that. We ask parents to do it because parents are our first line of information. And if a parent notices that their child is not well, that's a sign that we should keep them home. But as a backup, every single school district is going to receive thermometers so that we can take temperatures at our schools.
All right, Tony Thurmond, California's school superintendent, thank you so much. I know you have a big task. Welcome back anytime. Have a good 4th.
Thank you. Happy 4th, and continue to stay well.
All right, you too. Take care.
Back in 5, 4, 3, 2.
And we're back. Thank you so much for joining us for this interactive show, Getting Answers. We had a great conversation with State Superintendent Tony Thurmond. We'll have him back on again another time, but we'll be here every day at 3 o'clock on air and on live stream. Take good care.